All right, the stream should be online now. I'm recording in 5, 4, 3.
All right, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. This is our second meeting for the County Spending Affordability Advisory Committee for fiscal year 2026. And thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Holly Sun. I'm the committee chair and also the budget administrator for the county. So on the screen, there is a virtual meeting logistics there. Some of you are already familiar with that. It's mostly when you are not speaking, please mute yourself for the benefit of the whole group on that there. But during the middle or at the end of the PowerPoint presentations there, if you have questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself to ask questions there. And for anyone who still try to log in, feel free to check with Paul, who's our staff for this committee, to get technical help on it there. Also, just FYI, our meetings are public meetings, so these are being streamed and also will be recorded, and the video will be posted on county website. All right, so for today, we have 3 pieces there to go over this morning. And by the way, I do have a sharp stop before 9 o'clock because I have another meeting to attend. And there's a couple of members also need to be there from the county government. So just FYI, we do need to stop by 9 o'clock. And today we'll mostly focus on the capital budget. At our first meeting, we talked about the importance, try to help people connect the dot, and sometimes that probably go over some in more detail, some of the basics there, and see how capital budgeted function, how does it connect a lot of other piece of information, including operating budget there. So this morning I will do an overview of the capital budget, and then I'll hand it over to, I think originally I was thinking of this one. Then I'll hand it over to our colleagues at Public Works Department to talk about one of the big ticket capital budget item. That's Alec City Safe and Sound. And they will also going to talk about some of the stormwater projects situation there in the county. Then after that, the chair of the HB 1450 task force, which is focusing on school capital funding, will brief the committee, and the chair was a committee member, Alan Giles here. So thanks everybody. We will go over these items today. So first about the capital overview, we'll talk about the big picture and also the funding breakdown. That's usually what people are more interested in. And also touch upon a few major spending items here in recent years. So starting from the very basic, again, most people probably already know, but just for the benefit for folks that are relatively new to the committee and the public, the concept of the budget is really to develop a plan and execute a plan to allocate resources based on projections. And these resources are scarce because it's never enough. At least in my years of dealing with budget, it's always insufficient. And for county governments in general, there are 2 sets of budget. One is called operating budget. The other is called capital budget. Sometimes use the name CIP, Capital Improvement Program. And the operating budget is used to fund the daily operation. Most of them are staffing. There are also contracts and supplies, materials, those type of expenditure. And the capital budget is more infrastructure. So these are the buildings, recreation facilities, those kind of spending there. The 2 are connected because our capital budget are primarily funded through bond or debts, and these are paid through principal and interest payment every year, and because most of these debt are 20-year bonds there. And on the operating side there, sometimes when the new facilities are established there's also new operating budget costs there because people have to staff it and we have to do operating maintenance. So the 2 are closely connected, the operating and the capital budget. So I've been doing budget for 25 years. So there are a few major takes away when we come to the concept of budgeting. One is that we're making plans, but the future is always unpredictable. So what we can do is we're doing our best based on most current known information to inform the plan development there. So there's always uncertainty. So we do have to act on prudence because of the unknown there. So taking a more prudent and conservative approach is usually prevailing in all budget office there across the country there. And what is predictable, however, is that as local government, we always have to balance the budget. We cannot borrow out there. We do have to make ends meet. So as a result, we are required to live within means there. So that comes to the second point is that there are lots of desire for services, for constructions there. They are always much more than the resource can afford. And we do have to balance those desire with the resources available, because that's based on taxpayers' money and that's based on the county's affordability, put that on out there. And the other thing is we do have to make sure, be mindful about the tax burden there, because we want to keep our taxpayers, no matter it's the residents or business there, we want to retain them and attract the newcomers there, because they are the one who continue to supply the county with revenue. If they are driven away because tax burden and other issues there, then we're losing the future revenue stream there that can be used to support the service and infrastructure. These are all connected there. And one thing I learned from my experience is that when we're talking budgeting, we always need a long-term perspective there. Many decisions made at a point have long-lasting impact there. We're going to touch upon some of those today on the capital side, but on operating side is the same thing. And debt is a typical example. Once you make a decision on fund something through debt, next 20 years you get stuck with that. And last but not least is that I want to remind folks there, results or outcome are not always measured by input. I know people tend to celebrate how much money we spend or how much money we get, but eventually what's really matter is the quality and level of service provided, that which is impacted by money, but not always. And definitely investment is not the only way. How you allocate money and things not related to money, but related to operation and all those other things play critical role too. So I want to make sure that that's still with people when we talk about the budgeting. It's not just about funding. We also need to look at the outcome. What does it buy? Does it make everything better, or it's not necessarily? So capital requests across the county, not surprisingly, continue to seek affordability. So in the last few years, their annual GO bonds appropriated or approved by county council every year as between 72, 75 million per year. Until last year, it was elevated to 89 million because things are show some signs of improvement when we talk about debt affordability there. But the request for GO continue to be much higher. Based on all the requests received so far for FY26, it was about $112 million. That's from all the education entities as well as at the county's own government agencies there. And for future years, the multi-year plan, the average is about 147 million. So on average, in the next 6 years, we're talking about more than $57 million, even we're assuming a bond capacity of 90 million, which is probably on the high end there. So we are continue to see those difference between the requests and the resources will likely be available. And besides the general obligation bonds, other resources typically exceed capacity too. For example, the PAYGO request is 100 million just for CIP. That's not likely to be satisfied. In recent years, the government working with stakeholders did make a lot of efforts try to support different capital needs there. So there are measures taken such as exploring low interest loans. For the Elk City Safe and Sound, for example, the government has been applied and successfully received multiple low interest loans. The WIFIA loan from the federal government, that is about 3.17% interest rate versus the county GO bond is typically 4.5%-ish. And we also got some state loans that with low interest as about 2 to 2.5%, which is also favorable. So we did beef up our efforts on those alternative financing. There's also rate adjustment in recent years approved by County Council. That's for certain designated resources there for some self-supporting project services, and like transfer tax, school surcharge, and watershed fees. Those are being used at least partially to support a capital project, and that does provide help for those self-sustainable type of projects there. We also expanded our applications for grants, and in recent years, able to use some of the pay-goes here to beef up the efforts on the capital budget. So as a result, for 3 years in a row, the county had been able to fully fund the Board of Education's CIP requests there, and meet our commitment of funding of about $54 million per year based on preliminary projections there. But we still every year had to reduce all other county agency infrastructure requests, typically by up to 50% each year, in order to stay within means on that. So that's reflecting the final proposed budget. So as we just mentioned that the needs come from everywhere, so that's always needed from. So if you listen to those budget hearing meetings, it's very interesting, and people really want everything and really deserve everything, because we're Howard County, right? But there are a lot, and when they add up, it does create challenge about the funding side. And while everything is needed, in recent years, the committee and the county government both noticed a rising trend regarding the needs to maintain or renovate or replace aging infrastructure across the county. That's related to some of the demographic changes there in the county. Our colleagues in Department of DPZ, Planning and Zoning, will be here next week to talk about some of demographic and development trends there, so they can go over that in details. But what happened is the county's population increased a lot during 70s, 80s, and 90s, and then it has been slowing down. So a lot of public infrastructure, a new facility was built in those years. They are all come to the age of being need like major renovation or being replacement. So there are mounting needs there for different type of public facilities. There's including schools, including stormwater, water, sewer, roads, you name it there. That created pressure on maintenance side on that there. And there's some other trend there that they're going to talk about that has implications on the county's capital and operating budget too. So CIP funding, as we just mentioned, that the biggest part is traditionally the GO bonds. That's the county issue for 20 years and pay interest and principal every year. Using 25 approved capital budget as example, that directly has impact on the operating budget general fund, but we also do have low interest loans there authorized that year as well. And on top of that, we are using a pretty large piece of pay-go from the operating budget to fund the capital budget as well. Other than that, there's also designated resources. Those are certain type of either tax or fees that are restricted in terms of their usage by law. So they can only be used for supporting certain type of project or services there. And then there's also grants there, which is a relatively small piece, but we have been doing our best to try to apply for more.
Hey, Holly.
Yeah, go ahead.
In keeping with our discussion last week about making sure that we're using acronyms that everybody understands, can you tell people what PAYGO is?
Thank you. PAYGO is pay as you go. It's a cash funding, and I do have a couple slides and go over that in details shortly. Thank you. So after like 3 slides, I'll go to the PAYGO. Thank you. And GO bond is general obligation bonds, by the way. So talking about GO bonds, the appropriation was kept under $75 million during FY21-24. And GO bonds in this bar graph is the navy color one. So you can tell like in fiscal year 16 to 20, in those period of time, the county was able to authorize $90 to $97 million a year. But then after that, it has to shrink to 75 million or below. Why is that? There are two major reasons connected. One is that in this period of time, in the 5 years period of time, there are two major sizable projects either started or being finished there, and they are using a large amount of debt that's kind of other forms of debt, which is represented in those orange color bars there. One is the courthouse P3 project, which I'll talk in a minute. The other one is Alex City project that have been successfully using other financing, which is still debt the county still need to pay. So these are on top of the normal geo bonds there. It does mitigate the capacity left in geo bonds that can be issued to support all kinds of capital project. And you can see it relatively clearly here. And it also raised the county's overall debt burden indicators, which kind of raised concern to the county government and the committee. So we made some effort to control the debt for some years as a result. The courthouse P3 project. Now I want to talk about it but today, because there are a lot of misunderstanding about that, but also want to remind folks that this is not a place to talk about opinions, because people have different opinion about this project there. And I just want to say it's a given. It was decided, it's already down there. I just want to share a little bit light about my understanding about how it come into place and what is the impact on that. That's our focus today there. So the courthouse project, what I want to clarify is that it is the old courthouse was built in 1987. So all three branches of government, after years of debate, as of 2017, reached consensus to replace that. So that's already decided at that point, because it's just too old. It's a lot of inadequacy in terms of space, technology, and other things. And the renovation cost at that point was estimated to be almost as high as a new building. So that's already a decision made to do a big project at that point, was estimated at a cost construction of about $150 million. It's a huge project for the county. So the concentration at that point is, how do we deliver a project that big? At that point, it was the biggest project in county's history. Do we do the conventional way of building, or we try a new approach of P3? We end up as a government selected the hybrid P3 delivery on that there.
And P3 is public-private partnership.
Public-private partnership. Thanks, Todd, on that. And in that arrangement there, the private sector is responsible for design, building, operating, and maintenance in the next 30 years. And they also help finance part of the construction costs there. And the county ended up finance about half of construction cost through bond. And we also make annual service payment in 30-year contract there after building get finished and delivered to the county in 2021. And that 30-year contract is paid on a monthly basis there. And it's really to cover the cost of finance of the private sector, including their debt charge for the private financing, as well as their operating and maintenance costs there. It was a big contract there. So on annual basis, I think it's a little more than $10 million there. So the project does win several awards in a international P3 awards conference there, because the project's really nicely designed and delivered in time, and the procurement process is huge and very complex, but delivered relatively well by industrial standard there. So so it was actually a good project than that. But there are a couple of myths I want to debunk here, is that P3 is not really free money. So it's not necessarily private sector donating money or something. In fact, it's not even necessarily be used to save money. It's really the benefit of P3. The general understanding is that it's really value for money. So meaning that you make investment, you are relatively sure you will get good product and more importantly, ensure that the building be kept in good shape in the next 30 years, because in the contract is building that you have life cycle investment that private sector has to do, and that's building in the contract cost, not like in private sector. Usually we kick the can down the road when we don't have sufficient money there. And also it does shift the risk there, and it's incentivizes the private sector to be innovative. And there's also some organic approach in that approach, because it's a private conglomerate forming usually multiple companies for this project there, and they discuss together between design, operating team, etc. on that, and sometimes it generates savings. One example is they may design solar panel, they may design a lot of natural light, so that later in operating maintenance, you don't have to use so much utilities there. The other things for the maintenance there, because they might choose a more expensive floor, like marble floor, whatever. It seems to be more expensive upfront, but throughout the 20, 30 years of time, it has much less accumulated overall maintenance cost compared to the traditional operating maintenance with carpet, things like that there. So there are creative approach there because those design there. And also there's incentive system for them to keep the building in good shape, because if there's some malfunction, like utilities, the lights are not on like 20% of the time, and that monthly payment will be reduced accordingly based on very detailed specified measure in those contracts. So P3 has its own beauty, but it has to be used very carefully because it doesn't necessarily save money. Private financing, as we all know, typically have a higher interest than local, and they do need the beauty as private sector building, the profit margin on that. So it really has to be selected for certain project, and usually very sizable, very important. And in this case, because courthouse is the other branch of the government, and this is building almost 200-year-old, and people want a great product stand there in good shape in next 30 years.
Holly?
Barbara, you have a question? Go ahead.
So, no, I don't have a question. I think it's important for the entire committee to know that the Spending Affordability Committee was asked to look at various funding mechanisms, and we actually made this recommendation after evaluating a number of factors. So it wasn't just county government making a decision. We were asked as private citizens to weigh in also.
Yeah, and thank you. And in that process, it was I collected a lot of input. Spending Affordability Committee at that point has multiple special sessions there, and we brought in the consultants and the county subject matter expert, and did a lot of study and went through different delivery models, pros and cons, the costs relevant, and then try to see which is the best approach at that point, and committee participate in the whole process. And these are also public meetings there.
Yeah. Hey, Holly.
Yeah.
Speaking of clarifications, whether it's for new committee members or folks who are new to P3, or even people who might listen to this recording later, I know one misconception that has been out there ever since this project was announced is, who owns the courthouse? There's always been this talk of, the county has turned over the courthouse.
Right, the county owns it. Thank you, Steve, for
clarifications.
Yeah. It's a public infrastructure. I think it's more like a different mechanism about the financing and design and operation model, because traditional way we have bidding for the design. We do operating maintenance. We have a construction, a different bidding, and operating maintenance either contract out with different companies, or like the in-house folks are doing, or combined on that. This way, it's kind of like one big company take everything, and through the different financial arrangement there. Yeah. So it can be a great tool. It just had to be carefully used for P3 there. Alex City, here's another big project, and my colleague's going to talk about the project operation and status and timeline in a minute there. But just on the financial side there, again, so first just to go from the very beginning, why we take on such a big project there is because there's two devastating floods that's in 2016 and 2018. That's why the initiative of this big capital project, it's really huge. And after courthouse, this is now really the biggest project now. So as of fiscal 25, the current fiscal year, it has received total appropriation of 277 million. Then about 1/4 are in grants, so that we don't have to pay for that. But the rest is some type of county funding, no matter if we use low interest loans on geo bonds or on payable on that. But as we said that it was it's the size is almost beyond a typical capacity of a county of our size, because we are one of the big counties in Maryland, but we are still only have 300,000 population. We're not a huge county. It was a big undertake, but as we just talked about, the flooding happened. It damaged life and property. So the government really don't have a choice, have to do something about that. And it is a huge project as a result there. So the future funding, I would say the government are trying hard to focus on grants and low interest loans, try to finance them and want to minimize the impact on the county side. I want to say my colleagues from DPW and finance have been working really, really hard in the last several years, trying to seek for the lower cost financing there. So I want to give them credit there. It is still a very big project. So as you know, like as we showed earlier, that because of all those things there on top of the typical more routine and capital needs, the county, that's why not only at that point, but also now and continually, we have limited capacity in terms of financing all other capital projects in the county there. So the capital budget has implication on the operating budget, not only in terms of debt service, but also and the paygo, but also there's staffing needs and also operating maintenance needs for any new or expanded facilities there. It's fairly easy to understand. I'll give you a couple of examples. The East Columbia 50+ Center was finished. And that was estimated cost about 600,000 because you would need multiple new positions there and need operating maintenance there. There are projects in the plan, North Laurel Pool, Troy Park. Those also have between $500,000 to $1 million of annual operating budget ongoing costs there once they're finished. Again, it's the estimate cost there, but that's a concept there. And as of today, in our own capital budget book every year, all agencies now show operating budget impact except the school system. We have been working with our school partners and try to get the same information. It really helps the public understand the operating implications of capital project. It also helps decision makers to understand once you make a commitment on capital project, there will be needs to make commitment on the operating side as well. Otherwise, it's hard to keep things open and keep it in good shape, right?
Hey, Holly.
Yeah.
Could you go back 1 second and just, you talked about Ellicott City Safe and Sound at roughly $250,000 or $250 million so far. Is that right? But what do we have left to go is the real big question. 277 total appropriation to date, but we have a long way to go, right?
They are actually in the process of making cost estimate for the rest of them, and the focus at this point is North Tunnel, but there's a couple of other one there. Just bear with us. We have Mark that he's going to have 30 minutes to talk about the city. Hopefully he can address on that, and you can also ask question continuously on that.
Thanks.
Yeah. And just now we talk about operating maintenance staffing costs there. There's also the debt concerns there. The county has multiple, and as other governments there, usually there's a multiple debt burden indicators. So one of the critical one is the annual debt service payment as a percentage of revenue in the county's operating budget. And that we have a policy ceiling of 10%, which is close to industry standard. And some counties actually are using 8% as a policy, but 10% is fine. However, we did exceed that for a couple of years because of the reason I mentioned earlier, that there's big ticket projects and there are more than usual debt issuance in those period of time on that. So as a result, both the committee and the county has been doing our best, try to control the debt by lowering GO bond in those few years on that. as a result, and combined with the fact that revenue has been doing well in recent years, we were able to bring that percentage back to below 10%. And again, our finance department is going to do a presentation at the beginning of February to provide the latest and greatest projection for future years as well, to see how this indicator is going doing. Is a very important a percentage that we will need to monitor and control that continuously, because we don't want that number to be too high, because not only it's against our policy, but also it could raise red flag with credit rating agency. And also, more importantly, the higher the percentage of your annual operating budget are spent on debt payment, the less is available for everything else for the operating, no matter is the school, community college, library, or all kinds of service, public services, public safeties, snow removal, all those other things there. So it's important to keep the debt at a manageable level. And that's part of the charge of the committee in terms of putting a ceiling for next year's bond issuance there. PayGo, we just mentioned that as pay as you go. And this funding is cash funding. And where it comes from savings account, essentially. And that's the county's operating budget fund balance there. Why we have savings account there, the money's coming from surplus every year, just like using a family as example there. In some years, you have more income than the spending that year. Maybe you spend under plan, or maybe you get more money than you originally planned. So as a result, you have a fund balance. You always need to keep some fund balance there, but in the county, we have the charter mandate of rainy day fund of 7%, and then we have another 3% of policy reserve on top of that. But beyond that, if you want, you can use it for priority needs there. So it's but the nature is really one time by nature. You cannot dip into your savings account for critical services, and you cannot use for ongoing service every year and add a large amount, right? So in the last few years, we were lucky. There are somehow money keeps flowing, even they are not sustainable. They are supported by some one-time factors, federal stimulus, inflation, and the housing market was booming before it's kind of clashed there. So there are money that was temporary, and we use for temporary purpose on operating one-time initiative and also capital PayGo. But again, it's unpredictable and expected to normalize in next couple of years. So the amount is going to probably more going back to pre-pandemic level or somewhere in between there in foreseeable future. As you can see, before the pandemic, for many years, is anywhere between $0 to $14-15 million there. So that was the 14 million dollars. So we don't have to use PayGo. There are conceptually you can keep in reserve against future risk there, or you can use for operating one time. By charter, you can only use for one time initiative, or you can use for capital project. Now theoretically, you have different ways of use it. You can use to reduce debt financing needs. So instead of using financing, which you have to pay interest, you can use cash payment, or can be used to accelerate some critical project like maintenance backlog, or it can be used to fund new projects there. In reality, it's probably more B and C, and A also is used sometimes. So the spending from PayGo is historically more focused on road resurfacing, because the use life, they are typically not eligible for 20-year bonds. So cash funding from PayGo was the primary, or like all sources for the road resurfacing. And we do have lots of needs. As of last year, I remember that was estimated backlog of over 100 miles. And then the agency subject matter expert at that point was estimating needs of about $19 million a year, ideally, just to keep up with the annual needs, not even to address the backlog. So we have been beefed up the investment, but still not at that level yet. And as we all know, the more the delay, the more costly. Here's an indicator about different type of cost there. If you do it immediately, it could be $1.56 per square foot. But if you delay and later we have to do the review, it will be 3-4 times of that cost there. So the road resurfacing is one of the maintenance costs that we kind of need to do from PAYGO. And in recent years, because we do have the surplus there, other critical needs take on the usage of as well. In 25, there's a pretty significant use of capital PAYGO money, and here are some of the major projects in North Laurel Pool. This is a new project, but it has been asked by community for many years, and has been in the capital long-term plan for a long time. It was kept the pushback, so now was using PAYGO funding to keep that one moving. There's land acquisition, including High School 14, that's $18 million, and a school system renovation, road resurfacing, and other projects there. So besides PAYGO, which is non-sustainable, the county also has designated funding from different sources on that. So I'll talk about two here. One is school surcharge, the other is transfer tax. School surcharge, the fees level was elevated throughout the last several years in the county bill adopted several years ago. And here you can see the rate changes there between 2019 to now. The rate is 3 times basic at that time, the 3 times the original fee. But however, the revenue has also been growing as a result, but the revenue, the rate was 6 times from 5 years ago, but the revenue is only 3 times. So it's really hasn't been fully materialized as original plan in terms of fee changes there. And part of the reason is the housing market has not been doing good at all, and the square footage of those transactions of the new buildings had dropped like 40% in the last 3 years there, and permits issued for new construction dropped the lowest in the last 2 decades, and obviously that has been a major problem in terms of school surcharge, which is only applied for new construction there. Also, we noticed that because the original legislation has a tiered system, so there are certain properties there have lower rates as a result, and that's also some grandfathering. So as a result, that's also impact the total revenue. So we did see important growth of revenue that has been help supporting school system in terms of capital budget, but it's not as high as we originally hoped for. Transfer tax also have been dropping. The last 2 years dropped by 43%, almost a half of there. Again, we talk about the market, and there's also local regulatory changes there, limiting new construction. Everything probably play a role in terms of the very weak performance there. The rate was also increased a few years ago from 1% to 1.25%. But again, that coupled with the market change, we still end up significantly lower revenue compared to years ago there. Now, most recent months have been seeing signs of bottoming out. There's only a couple of months of data of positive changes and mixed with lower ones too. So we're still watching it there, but hopefully things will start to see some recovery in the coming year. Obviously, that's depending on mortgage rates and supplies in the market. Transfer tax in the county by law are designated to different type of projects there. So the 0.3125% of that's the rate designated for the school CIP. There's also a piece of those tax rate for recreation parks, capital project, ag land preservation, fire CIP, and the housing community service there. And we did hear from all different agency presentations just a few months ago there, and each of them are designating more needs than the resources there. As we just mentioned, that the significant transfer tax drop has been creating stress for all those capital projects and stress there. And some actually are saying that they cannot even maintain a current level of service there if the revenue doesn't increase dramatically in recent years. In near future. Talking a little bit about school capital budget, it's another major spending on the capital side there. So just to give you general overview, these are the last 10 years there. The total capital funding for the school system obviously have been increasing. About 10 years ago, it's a little more than $60 million in general. And more recent years, more hovering around 80 to $100 million in general. And local funding has been, on average, make up about 2/3 of total school CIP, all those vary between years. The state funding, here's the amount there. They have been increasing as well, but more volatile in recent years. We're going to talk about on top of the normal funding, we do get some one-time boost from the Build to Learn money. It is, again, not sustainable, but it provides some temporary help and will continue to do so in the next couple of years. This is a county funding, and then I show the dollar amount here. And in most recent couple years, we try to provide more predictable funding stream by showing the school system there. We are committed to provide $50 to $54 million per year. And in reality, we have been honoring that, and where possible, exceed that when the funding allowed there. As we mentioned earlier, that there are different components there. The geo bond, the overall capacity has been shrinking in recent years, but we're able to use it, use PAYGO funding to help out, and also using transfer tax and school surcharge to increase the overall commitment. As a result, in recent years, we're able to 100% fund the board request for the capital budget. So one quick talk about the county's key tax rates in comparison to local jurisdictions there, because sometimes there is desire or advocates for whether we should raise more taxes there. So just give you a full picture on at least the key taxes there. On the general fund operating budget, 90% of the revenue comes from property tax and income tax. And income tax, the counties already have the highest rate, and it's also the maximum level allowed by the state. Real property tax, we are the second highest rate after Baltimore City. But if you check GPT, it will tell you something different. It will say Howard County has the highest real property tax measured in absolute dollar value, because we have a relatively high housing prices, their housing value on that. But in terms of rate, we are the second highest. Transfer tax, it's the fourth highest currently based on fiscal 24 data. School surcharge, I think we are roughly the third highest there. That one's a little bit murky because some counties are flat fee like us, some others are varying between based on the square footage. But if we use 2,500 square foot as a measure, then we are the third highest. This just give you some general background, because you will hear other speakers talk today and in coming sessions there, and hopefully it gives you a general background that can help you digest and connect dots, basically. So I'll pause for 1 minute, and then I'll hand it over to Mark to talk about Elk City. I know people are ready for that too. Any questions? Okay, we have plenty of time to talk about later, and I'll not go away anyway for any of the future meetings there, so we can continue to discuss. Thank you.
Holly,
go ahead.
One thing real quick, just so we're clear, a 2,500 square foot unit is not 2,500 square feet of above ground heated and cooled space. It's all the square footage within the footprint of a building. So a single family house of what you would say, a realtor would say, is 2,500 square feet of livable space. The permit gets pulled on all of the space within the footprint. So the garage, if it's 500 square foot, 600 square foot, 2-car garage, that gets added to the square footage. An unfinished basement, that gets added to the square footage. A front porch, that gets added to the square footage. So 2,500 square feet is not 2,500 square foot house, what you would normally think of. It's all of the square footage. So it might translate, 2,500 might translate, 2,500 usable square feet might translate into 3,200 or 3,400 square feet for permitting purposes. And not every county does it the same way. So it's a little deceptive if you just pick 2,500 and multiply it times the rate, because other counties do it differently.
Right.
We do it.
You're absolutely right. This one is it's harder to
Yeah, it's very
compare, because
Yep.
they could use different definition, but also they use different way, and some have layered the system there. It's not apples there.
But my point though is that our permitting square footage is way higher because we define a lot of unfinished space as space when we pull permits, and not everyone does that. So just something to keep in mind. It's our 2,500 is not equal to somebody else's 2,500, and in fact, our 2,500 is more like 3,300. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you. That's interesting to know. Yeah. All right. Thank you. For the sake of time, I want to invite Mark. Mark, can you share your screen? I want to invite Mark from EPW to talk about Elk City, and he will be followed by Alan to talk about HB 1450. Mark, are you able to share your screen?
I'm getting in there right now.
Yeah, it's up. Are you able to make it full screen?
I'm looking for my icon. I don't see my icon, so I'm going to do it. Oh, there it is. Okay, so sorry for that. And
Yeah, go ahead. Thank
I
you.
can get to the beginning of the slide deck here. But while I'm doing that, I'd like to say that for those of you that don't know me, I'm Mark DeLuca, and I am the Environmental Services Bureau Chief in Public Works, and I appreciate being able to share today the Ellicott City Safe and Sound. This is as a result of the two devastating storms that we had in 2016 and 2018. And one of the other things I wanted to mention here at that is that the capital project that we use, which is C0337, was started in 2014. So it was started before the flood, and it was to do Ellicott City improvements. Became the perfect vehicle after the floods, immediately after the floods, to repair Ellicott City and all the structural damage that we had. And I think that we probably in years past, we were before this committee and showed some slides of what that looked like. And so a lot of the money, not a lot of the money, but a portion of the money that was appropriated, that makes up the 277 million, was used to repair Ellicott City. And of course, there were some reimbursements through FEMA and the state, but they never covered 100% of the replacements. So there was a lot of county funding just to get it repaired. So the Ellicott City Safe and Sound Plan, there are these steps. It consists of 7 major projects. It's preserving historical and cultural resources. We also did a high ground access point so people could evacuate. We have these capital projects, the master plan for Ellicott City. We also have another maintenance that we do, which is clearing the waterways. That's ongoing and as needed. We have a criteria set up where we evaluate the rainfall and the wind speeds and go into the streams and pull out debris. That was one of the issues that we had noticed in the previous storms that really created a lot of log jams and a lot of unnecessary flooding. By clearing these waterways, it's helped a good bit. We have a permanent emergency alert system that's been installed, and of course, back at the top, the flood mitigation. So the project goals, the EC Safe and Sound projects work collectively. They work as a system, and the North Tunnel, which I'll focus on a little bit more specifically today, is one of 2 conveyance projects. And so we have, just to clarify that, we have retention projects, which are like ponds that will fill up, they're dry ponds, and they'll fill up with water, and then they'll release the water slowly after the storm. And then we have conveyance projects, which are like pipes and culverts and things like that, which just get the water out as quickly as possible and into the Patapsco River. So the plan seeks to reduce depth and velocity as much as possible, and also supporting public safety and non-structural flood proofing. So we get a reduction with these designs. We get a reduction in street level flooding up to 3 feet, down from 6 to 8 feet, which was experienced during the 2 storms. And we get a reduction in floodwater velocities, depending where you are on Main Street, from 15 to 25 feet per second in the 2016 and 18 storms, down to about 5 feet per second. So now that's significant when you measure that against the depth of the water, and it's more survivable than during the storms that we experienced. And of course, just to remind everyone that we did lose 3 lives in those storms. Here is an overall graphic of the Safe and Sound projects. And what you'll see here is we've color coded them for projects that are complete, projects in construction, and those in design. And the projects that are complete, we have the Quaker Mill Pond, which is here. And then we have the H7 pond, which is in the interchange of 29 and 40. And the H4 pond, this is a pond that should be completed relatively soon. And we're estimating fall of this 2025. And then we have some other ones that are still in design. And that's our T1, and this is our NC3 project down here. And then we have Maryland Avenue, which is a culvert design, which is a conveyance project. And then the major central piece of the flood mitigation project is this extended North Tunnel. And the reason why we call it the extended North Tunnel and not just the North Tunnel, I mean, we should just call it North Tunnel now, but originally it wasn't going to be as long as it is. We lengthened the tunnel to improve the efficiency of capturing water and preserving some cultural and historic landmarks. Okay. Here are some pictures of the completed projects, and this is H7 in your left-hand corner. This is what it looks like. It's a relatively large pond. These are large ponds. They're not like your regular stormwater management ponds. And I know this measure doesn't maybe resonate with you, but we measure the volume in acre feet. And so H7 and Quaker Mill and the H4 pond vary between 10 acre feet to about 13 to 15 acre feet, which are huge ponds. A typical stormwater pond might be 1 acre foot, 2 acre feet, and maybe a large one might be 3 acre feet. So these retain a lot of water, and they have structures that release the water at a specific rate. And so they attenuate the flow of floodwaters into the streams that they release this water into. And that's one of the ways that we control keeping the water within the stream banks. So I wanted to talk about the North Tunnel a little bit more specifically. Well, what you have here at the top of the graphic is an aerial that shows where the tunnel starts, and it starts, what you see is Main Street. That's this area right in through here. And it starts at Papillon Drive. This is the entrance of the tunnel. This is where we're doing most of the work right now. And then it proceeds on this path and empties into the Patapsco River at north of Lot B. And you can see here's the county courthouse, the old courthouse. And so it actually runs north of the courthouse. I know a lot of people think that it's right under Main Street. It isn't. It is in the rock that is slightly north of Main Street. And here you can see the grade, the existing grades of the surface, and how it undulates. And this is the first drop shaft at Papillon Drive. It's about 150 feet below grade, and it runs at a particular slope to the Patapsco River. So you can see that it stays well with under Main Street. And I think I have a comparison here. We used the courthouse is approximately 75 feet in height, and this is about 2 courthouses down. So if you want to go take a look at the courthouse and admire this cupola, we're about two of those below ground for the majority of this project. Now this Lot F, if you're familiar with Main Street, Lot F is at the corner of Ellicott Mills Drive and Main Street. And this is really the lowest elevation. Sorry about that. This is actually the lowest elevation that the ground surface gets to, but even that, it's still about 80 feet. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's about 60 feet below grade at that point. So the tunnel construction milestones right now, we actually started the Papillon Drive site development in December. We're about 40% complete there. The tunnel boring machine, or TBM, is in the process of being rebuilt and refurbished, and we're about 34% complete there. We're in the process of starting the shafts and chambers, and this is a drill and shoot operation, drill and blast. And we'll start that in earnest in February, but we have started blasting for the drop shafts earlier in December. We'll actually start tunneling November of next year, 2026, and we'll be substantially complete in fall of 2027. And what you see here is we are in the stream actually and had to divert the stream. So this is the stream diversion. This is actually the Hudson, which runs on the north side. And when the drilled shafts are completed, we'll relocate this stream into its original position, which is somewhere around here. And I'll show you a little bit more with this graphic. This is what the construction site will look like at Papillon. Right now, this is where the workers are crossing the street. This is their parking lot, and you can see that as you drive down Frederick Road, you'll see that. We've diverted the stream. This is the first drop shaft that they're working on presently, and then they'll do the mining shaft, which is right here, and they'll be building this piece of the tunnel. And then the tunnel boring machine, the TBM, is going to be about 300 feet long, and it'll run on rails within the tunnel. And this is just the starter tunnel. And then all the material will be coming out of this mining shaft and then gets trucked out this way and then off to where we're disposing of the material. This is just this is taken from our plan set, the drawing here on the left, which shows how the cranes and the drilling will take place. This is in the center. You'll see a picture of the drill rig, and they'll be drilling down 10 feet at a time. Then they load it with an explosive, blast it, and then they mine it out. This is a picture on the right of a actual construction site. This is not our construction site yet, but this is what it will look like as we're excavating down for the mining shaft. This mining shaft will be 45 feet in diameter, and it'll have a so it'll be a relatively large excavation. The tunnel excavating machine, the boring machine. This is a picture of it in the lower left. We had a competition for its naming, and we're calling it Rocky. It is 18, a little bit more than 18 feet in diameter. It's a hard rock tunnel boring machine, and it's in a manufacturing plant in Salon, Ohio. We did visit it most recently to check on its progress and check out the factory and just do an inspection of the site. So we are expecting acceptance testing in July of 25 this year. We're about 34% complete. This is a timeline and estimated cost update for the key projects. And I've listed on the left-hand side the name of the projects and their status, the estimated cost, if there's any gap in funding, and potential funding sources. So Quaker Mill, H7 Dry Pond, H4 Dry Pond, and the North Tunnel have all been funded, completely funded. They have no gap. And the phase 2 of the tunnel is the CSX track work and the Main Street Bridge. This is still under design right now. We do have enough money. There is no gap for that. There's some work, some major work. Another drop shaft is anticipated for Lot F. It has not been completely designed, and it has not been completely priced. But the price, the estimated price tag is somewhere around 45 to 55 million, and it is currently unfunded work. And we believe that this is an overestimation at this point, because this, once the way that they're doing their estimation right now is to use plug-in values. But since the crews are actually there, and once a design is done, then the actual people that would construct will be able to use real values. So we do expect the value to come down.
So Mark,
Yes.
it is, since we are kind of designing as we go, we hired a contractor, and then what do we have? Just a cost plus contract with them?
So it is a construction manager at risk contract with them. And so this is not necessarily on the critical path, this Lot F work. So the design team, the way that this would work is that the design team, what was actually bid was the North Tunnel, which was what I had showed you earlier. Papillon Drive, drop shafts, a tunneling all the way to the Patapsco River, and then an outfall there. So that was what was priced, and that's the 141 million. This other work could potentially be done by others, not necessarily this contract, and certainly not by this contract if we don't believe we can live with that price. So we've broken these things out in phases, and this phase 3 work for Lot F, what we have in the design right now for the tunnel is that it can be done as a separate project, this Lot F work. And so if need be, we would, so this estimate is based on the current contractor's estimation, but certainly this work could be bid.
But it's an estimate. It's not a contract. It's an estimate.
Correct. It's an estimate.
But are there detailed construction drawings, or is it just, this is what we expect it's going to be, but there's going to be change order after change order after change order through the process?
So this is still, it's not 100% designed for this portion of it. And so this estimate that we have fills in some gaps where we don't have the design. But the CMAR, the construction manager at risk model also includes a constructability review and a risk review. And we have an ongoing risk register where the contractor works with our designers and they highlight, where they're going to see a problem or where they can see that they may need to, it may be a little bit more expensive on some of the work items, and in other areas they can see where they can implement a savings. So when all is said and done at the very end, this method reduces change orders.
Right.
And reduces a lot of those unknowns that you get when you design in a vacuum and then bid it and then work with a contractor who finds out things later and then charges you a change order for it. So, and we would, even though we would bid this out, we would bid it out in a format where this constructability review would take place first so that we could hone the design and try and eliminate as much as possible those types of change orders. And that's what we did for the North Tunnel. And that was a large piece of what we did before they put a shovel in the ground, was to develop the constructability review and also the risk register that the contractor and the designer working together developed the risk register. So we know where the pain points, the pinch points can possibly be.
The reason I ask, I guess, is I know as a committee, when we were first hearing about this 4, 5, 6 years ago, we were hearing numbers for the whole project of in the 130 million range, as my recollection. And any other committee members jump in if you think that's off. But now we're at 277 and we still have a whole bunch of projects to go. So are we looking at a $500 million project here?
No, my answer to that would be no. And so things have changed since the last time we did present to the committee. Some of the designs changed. And for example, we're calling it the North Tunnel. We called it the extended North Tunnel because we made the tunnel longer as a result of some of the designs that were coming back weren't working for us. And we needed to protect historical and cultural things. And so we had to extend the tunnel to about a mile.
Right.
So, and so that's changed a good bit. And then I also want to mention again, like I mentioned at the very beginning, the capital project is at 277 million. But that also included a lot of things that aren't necessarily associated with the EC Safe and Sound project. Of course, if you were to add all these up, you're going to get somewhere close to that. But there were several millions of dollars that were spent to repair Ellicott City that came out of this project.
So is the 277 the expected ultimate cost for the entire EC Safe and Sound project at this point in time?
And Mark, before you chime in, this is Angela Cabell and Chief Staff. Can I just also underscore the point that these projects are still developing? And if you look at the potential fund source, we've had a lot of reliability on outside grants and low interest loans. So while you're seeing various costs, we have to keep that in mind as we are seeking the outside funding, and we're also estimating conservatively based on the development and evolution of these projects.
Yes, I think that's a very good point in that as of the construction purchase order for the North Tunnel, we've relied heavily on grants and other sources of funding. And we've listed that in this chart as well, that a lot of the projects will move forward, and they're grant dependent right now.
But just from a cost standpoint, funding source is one side, cost is the other. Just from a cost standpoint, is the estimate of 277 the estimate for the completed EC Safe and Sound project?
No,
I
that's
believe
not.
it,
That's appropriation so far. So
So
that's
what's the
the
estimate? What's the estimate at this point in time for the whole project?
I
The
think
cost side, not the funding side, just the cost
right,
side.
I think what's listed here as the gap are the part hasn't identified sources that. So that's to be identified in the future. So that's in the park, in the bulk. You see the gap there? These are the one not appropriate so far. So that will be in the future requester to keep those components going. But as Marcus mentioned, that those are heavily grant dependent. Those will primarily be seeking for the grant combined with low interest cost going forward. So the what's in the gap hasn't been materialized.
But okay, but then so the column that says estimated cost for those first 5 projects, well, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, actually 7 lines shown is the 277. So to be added to that are the NC3 dry pond and the T1 project. To be added to the 277 so far. And we're hoping that the Maryland Avenue culvert project comes in at less than the 50 million, and we're hoping that the phase 3 lot F work comes in at no more than the 55 million shown. I'm just trying to get an idea of the scope of cost of what's left to go.
I agree, Todd, and I'm looking at somewhere between 45 and 90 million additional.
Which is the dry pond, NC3 dry pond and T1?
Right, going from the 35 to 45 to 55 and adding it, putting it all together, somewhere it's gonna be, the least it could be would be 45, which I don't ever see, but looks like upwards of $90 million.
Still to go. That's what you think? Mark,
Well,
correct us if we're wrong.
Just looking at these figures.
Yeah. And note that we intentionally, estimated conservatively.
Yeah,
So these are
I hope,
estimates, and then we're kind of like matching up, as the projects evolve and matching up potential funding sources. But yes, they are conservative estimates.
yeah, obviously, we all hope that's true, but we've been hearing that since it was originally estimated at 130, and now we're at 360, maybe.
well, I will say that the 130 that you're referring to was for the tunnel. And that was one of the that was one of the estimates for the tunnel. And the tunnel then ended up being 141. So a lot of times, and a lot of times the other numbers never made it into the conversation. But yeah, it was, I think we had estimated on some preliminary designs that the tunnel would be about 130. And that was up from, at one time early on when we were at 30% design, we were estimating the tunnel would be about 90. And then it went to 131 or a little bit more than 130. And then it went to 141 after we included everything that needed to be included in the tunnel. So the answer is that the gap does represent the additional amounts of money that we need to complete, as already observed, to complete phase 3 and also to do Maryland Avenue, NC3 pond and the T1. are unknown at this time. They're to be determined. We haven't actually, I mean, we've gotten concept drawings for these two, but we're still very early on and really can't estimate them. So, but, you know, so we don't have estimates for those ponds, but they would be in addition to, and when we're talking about ponds, I guess a guide would be that you could look at what the other ponds have cost us. And the NC3 pond is larger than the other dry ponds that we did. Maybe it's, you know, so it is going to be a little bit more than, or maybe it will, you know, definitely be more than the ponds that we've done, but that's the magnitude of cost that we're looking at. So even if you were to double those costs, that's the magnitude of, say, an NC3 dry pond.
Right.
T1 is a substantially larger pond. We're not exactly sure where that's going to be yet. And we still would need to do a lot of negotiating on scope, as well as with a contractor. So, you know, I'm not exactly sure where that's going to fall. So you know, the NC3 pond, I think there's a solid estimation of the neighborhood that pond is going to come in on, and the T1 pond, I'm just not sure, but it's not going to be, you know, we're not anticipating that it's going to be threefold or twofold what an NC3 pond would come in as.
Well, I just want to clarify one thing. I want to make sure I heard you right. You think the original budget for the North Tunnel was 130. That estimate went down to 90 when we got into it, and then it came in at 141?
No, close, but no. So it was, as the design progressed, we released numbers, and when the job was at about 30%, so it was still kind of conceptual, it was coming in around 90 million. And then when we advanced further and we had the CMAR on board, the contract manager on board, and started doing the risk assessments, it went up. And then to about 130, 135, something like that. And then when the prices were actually bid, because we were also hit by, you know, a great deal of inflation, the CPI was completely out of control for a few years there, and actually got price quotes from the subcontractors. They came in higher. And so, and there were some other things that caused the prices, some other things in the design that cost us a little bit more money. And so it eventually got to the 141 million. And that's what we have a purchase order for, is 141 million.
Thanks.
Okay.
This is Barbara. I've always been curious, given the area that we're saving, what is the tax income that we receive from that area?
Well, I can't answer that, but maybe someone else could answer that.
I don't have that information, Barbara.
I know, but I just think that
yeah. But I think the issue is that again, I'm not supposed to speak for the elected officials, but like I think the issue is that as government, you have to think for the whole county as a picture, and the flooding happened twice. And I think Dr. Irani said in his first presentation that has been happening more frequently, not only in Maryland, but also in other areas. So it became an issue that the government felt the pressure to address, regardless whether it's only in that location or other. And it's just very costly. And also the county never take such a big project before and never did that before. So even the cost estimate early, the engineering and the estimate, they are quite different as it evolved, and then once the contract brought in and inflation costs building into the building material costs and the labor costs as well. So it really kind of expanding and going up the cost there, it does become gigantic. I think the point you tried to make is it's really huge expensive, right? How does it compare on the revenue in that area? The problem is, I think for the government there, that's on the financial side, but it is a project. Are we going to do it or not?
So
I
I would like to add that, and I'm sure there's someone who can jump in here, but and add more detail to what I'm about to say. But there was an economic analysis done. There was to show the loss, and so some of the calculus for the moving forward with the scope of the project was based on the economic analysis of the area and the surrounding region that Ellicott City affects.
This is Richard Clinch. I did a study for the Economic Development Authority back in the day. I'll find it and send it to you, Barbara. But the tax revenues from Main Street are very low in comparison to the cost of mitigation. I just don't have the numbers in my head. I did it over a decade ago.
I remember something.
I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
So that's the end of the presentation for the Safe and Sound. And we also have a short presentation on the watershed restoration and the stormwater infrastructure. And Mark Richmond will lead you through that. And Mark, I can control the slide deck if you just want to tell me when to click.
Okay, sounds good. You already told everyone what I'm going to be talking about, so you can flip to the next slide.
All right.
So a little bit of history for our water restoration work here in the county. The EPA requires pollutant reductions to the Chesapeake Bay, and that's based on the Clean Water Act. They delegate the responsibility to the state of Maryland, to MDE, Maryland Department of the Environment, to enforce this, and MDE does this through an NPDES permit, a municipal NPDES permit, and it basically proposes ways to reduce the effects of impervious surfaces and nutrients on the county waterways, which ultimately leads to reductions in the bay. There's pages and pages of ways that we can do that, but to meet all the, so there's a lot of different components that go into meeting our permit conditions. If we don't meet our permit conditions, we could face a consent order from the state, which basically requires us to still do all the work, but it imposes an additional monetary penalty. Next slide. So, it takes a lot of money to meet our permit. So the county has a dedicated funding source, which is our Watershed Protection and Restoration Fund. For our last 5-year permit period, on average, the costs were $15 million per year. We are now in year 2 of another 5-year permit, and we anticipate the annual funding needed to meet our permit conditions to be between $16 and $17 million a year. And that includes the stormwater pond repairs, which is going to get its own slide shortly. So it's everything that goes into meeting our permit conditions. Last year, FY25 was the first time since the inception of the fee that we requested an increase in the fee, because the revenues from the fee was not keeping up with our needs. So last year, the council approved an increase to the watershed fee, and that's allowing us to continue a level of effort where we can continue to meet our permit conditions. Next slide. The biggest component of meeting our permit conditions, or the biggest cost involved with meeting our permit conditions, is the maintenance of our stormwater infrastructure. And real briefly, I may be talking about risers and barrels and embankments, so I thought I'd show a graphic that kind of explains what those are and how that fits into a pond. The Stormwater pond is typically a depressed area that holds water temporarily and releases it slowly. It's done so by a vertical pipe or a vertical structure, which is called the riser, which meters out the amount of water that can leave the pond. That water then goes into a horizontal pipe, which is the barrel pipe, and then that discharges in a non-erosive manner. Back in the day, when a lot of our ponds were built, the barrel and the riser were made out of metal, which was the thing of the time. So we were doing what everyone else was doing. At some point, probably maybe 15 years ago, Maryland Department of the Environment, the Dam Safety Division, said that metal pipes don't have a long enough service life. So moving forward, everything had to be concrete. That still left us with a lot of ponds that are out in the county with metal infrastructure that's reaching its service life. Metal pipe service life anywhere from 20 to 25 years is the norm. Concrete infrastructure is considerably more, as you can see. And there's two example ponds on the screen, and the one on the right, you can see a concrete structure with a metal trash rack on top of it. That's literally the tip of the iceberg of what you see on the surface relative to what's actually processing the water and releasing it out. Next slide. So the county is required, well, we have close to 1,600 ponds in the county. 171 of them have metal infrastructure that's approaching design life. And the county does a triennial inspection of all of these ponds. So once every 3 years, we're going through all these ponds and we rate them on a scale of 1 to 4, with 1 being adequate and 4 being critical. And as you can see, of the 171 ponds that are still out there with metal infrastructure, 74, close to half of them, are currently rated as a 4, which means we need to be working on them and replacing the metal with concrete infrastructure. These days, a pond repair costs anywhere from $1.8 to $2 million, but I assumed 1.8 million on average. I'm looking at the 74 ponds that are currently rated 4. Yeah, that would be in today's dollars $133 million. And knowing that that's a ridiculous number to ask for in one given year, we're spreading it out, and we're trying to do 7 to 8 ponds a year, which has a requirement of roughly $14 million of the $16 to $17 million that I mentioned on the previous or second previous slide. And at that rate, we're about 10 years to complete the rated 4 ponds. Last year, when I did this exact same slide, the rated 4 ponds was 82. So we are, making a dent in that, but we're making a dent in it at a rate that we can afford to fund. You can go to the next slide, which I think is my last slide, just to kind of show you what we're seeing out there, or in some cases not seeing. You can see areas that have eroded, separation in the pipe material from the metal riser to the metal barrel. The photo below that, the metal barrel has actually collapsed, but the concrete structure is still in place. Yes, that one that Mark's pointing to. The picture to the left shows a metal pipe that's missing the bottom for a portion of it. So those are the kind of things that happen over time with the metal infrastructure and the need to replace it with concrete. If we don't replace them, we can have emergency road closures, property damage, personal injury, or but environmental degradation. Because as the pipe fails, we usually have a flush of water. The embankment will then fail. So we have a lot of water and sediment going downstream. So that's pretty sure that's the end of my quick overview of watershed restoration and stormwater infrastructure and the need for it and the need for repairing it and what it costs. I don't know if there's any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark, and both Marks. Thanks, God. So next one, Alan, I think you have less than 30 minutes, which probably will be enough for you to
I think it'll be enough. So
I'll
you'll
put
pull the
it
deck
on the
for me.
screen. Yeah.
Okay, so first I want to give just a basic introduction to the HB 1450 task force. Sort of in response to the same kinds of things we've been hearing from today, which are about obligations we have and availability of funding and the effort to control our spending within what we can afford with what we actually have. One of the concerns from the legislature has been how do we continue to fund school construction needs? And especially given that we are changing from a high growth area to an area where concerns about maintaining what we already have and extending the life of what we have is a concern. So the legislature put together a group, which is really like these first three slides that are just introductory, to take a look with stakeholders as well as representation from the school system, county government, both financial and operational areas who rely on capital funding as well, and at the state level. So we have representation from the county council, from the Board of Education. We had presentations from the Interagency Committee on School Construction in an effort to pull together people to take a look at what's the issue, what options are out there, what funding can we expect, and what other possibilities exist. So I'm going to just whip through to the task force charge, which is essentially to look at what we need to meet some of the deferred maintenance, which in the same way that both Marks talked about, in a way where you take care of what you immediately have to take care of, and sometimes you have to sort of farm out the deferred pieces in order to fit within the monies that you have available. But that's obviously a concern. To determine the projected funding needs, because while we talked about being able with the money that we had to meet the basic demands of the Board of Education over the past several years, as we look going forward, those requests in the CIP, 10-year CIP, are going up. And so what do we do to that? And then identify anticipated funding sources. So what does the money actually look like coming in on the revenue side? And then 4, study options. And some of those involve some of the things we already talked about today, which is increasing the transfer tax or changing the way we apply it, looking at a commercial excise tax that would be subject for school funding, exercising authority to get additional tax revenues or fees, and studying any other potential thing that we could do. So I first want to qualify that what I'm talking about here is a committee that's still in process. We have not issued any report. We have not made our recommendations. We're still exploring. And so we will be coming up with a report in the spring. The original date was supposed to be October, but the scope of the project is, more complex, involving all those different levels of government, as well as, needs across the county and what trends that we're seeing nationally as well as regionally. So we are now extended into the spring before we issue a report. So that takes us to the progress one, which is the next one, which essentially says what I just said. Okay, so go on to the next one, which is about recognizing how complex this is. In the same way that Holly spoke to you all about the fact that capital and operating are inextricably combined, that the cost of capital has an impact on operating, and the impact of building something has an impact on continued operation. And I think underlining all of this is the fact that we have to remember, when we do a capital project, it's not like it's done. We're going to be paying on that through debt service and refinancing of the debt for 20 years, as well as whatever we approve 19 years for whatever we approved last year, 18 years for whatever we approved the year before that, 17, 16, 15. So what we continue to do is add, and that has an impact on operations and what's available then to even operate those things. So trying to balance all that is complex, and the legislature hoped that by pulling this diverse group of people together, we'd be able to get a handle on it and come up with some creative options. So a couple of the things that we found out as we're looking at this, the state has funding available for capital. So when you look at the CIP, that total request number includes, as we were looking at this current year, about 54 million from the county and about 20 some million from the state, and then some funding from the Build to Learn, which is a one-time funding to help meet some gaps around the state. Our percentage that we get for an eligible project has been dropping. So originally we got something on the order of 61% from the state, and we matched on the other end. Now we're getting to 51%, and that may drop further because it's all based on the fact that our systems are pretty much in good shape, and we are a prosperous county, and the needs have been identified by the state as greater in other areas. So that's a variable, but we have some basic idea of how that's going to work. But there is less money available from the state and fewer things that are eligible for us in terms of funding. We also have that the blueprint, which everybody hears about, and mostly is think about it in terms of operating, also has capacity and capital elements attached to it. You can't suddenly start serving more students without a place to put them. So looking at what that's going to look like and how we have to meet that is another thing. New funding, as we've been talking all morning, is limited by what we can afford to borrow, because we have limits on how much our debt service can be. And as our demographics are changing and our revenues shift is changing, and as enrollment in the schools is dropping, the balance is different. And so we have to look at that. That BOE decisions on the allocation of funding is not always based, and rightly so, on what's eligible for funding, but what is determined to be the highest need, as determined by the people in charge looking at what the needs of the school system are. And that we cannot look at operating without capital, and we can't look at capital without operating. The next one is, where are we? Key findings so far. So what we're looking at here is sort of answering the first charge, is what do we have out there, and what are we looking at in terms of funding? And so you can see that when we look at that, the BOE approved for 26 and the long range capital plan going over the 10 years is something that's averaging about $124 million a year, as opposed to what we recently talked about, which was like 84. So that's something that's a gap, and we need to look at what does that look like, and how are we going to deal with that. The next slide takes a look at determine the projected funding, which of course we've been talking about all morning, again, is something that we have to be concerned about. And as we're at the top of income tax, and we're the second in property tax, and we've increased our school surcharge, but it's not bringing in the money that was in it. How do we look at that, and what are we going to do in order to take a look at that? Then the next one, more key findings. We identify where those gaps are. And so based on the official request, which is in the board's CIP request for 10 years, it's between $8 and $71 million a year, a pretty significant gap. And it's still subject to change because, again, as we've heard in these recent things, there are going to continue to be more stressors on the budget in terms of building things that are more environmentally sustainable, that are using products that are less harmful to the environment, all of which increases costs. Inflation continues to rise. And so, it's a challenge. We're having a lot of fun. Going on to the next thing. So what we've been doing is looking at options and trying to consider things that are happening in other parts of the country or in some of our neighboring counties or in experiences we've had so far with looking at more creative financing options, because either you get it from taxes or you take it from another project or you find another source of money. So as both Marks talked about, some of this is from funding, some of it is from grants, some of it might be from more efficient ways to manage something. So we're trying to balance those things. So I'm just throwing out here and just make sure that everybody understands these are not recommendations. These are just possibilities that have been put on the table and that we're investigating and trying to see what, you know, what makes sense within, again, that overall picture. We're specifically focused on schools, but those schools fit within the complexity of Ellicott City Safe and Sound and stormwater management and police stations and roads and, you know, all of those things we've been talking about this morning. So one is that the PAYGO, which Holly, you know, discussed, there's an option to let's look at increasing or designating officially that a larger amount of PAYGO go to schools, especially to hit the deferred maintenance. Also the transfer tax, which we talked about today, looking at how that's distributed across the various agencies and to schools, and might there be a way to increase that? And then it might be something like increasing the transfer tax that is charged for construction that is over $1 million or $1.5 million, and see if something that was prorated differently would help generate something. Again, everyone should recognize that in many ways Howard County is built out. There's limited for new growth. People are not, housing is not turning over as quickly as had been anticipated because of mortgage rates and all those other things, but that's one of the things to look at. Also, in Delegate Atterbury's bill, there's a look at enacting a commercial building excise tax, much like the school fee tax is on residential. New construction is apply that to commercial and look at what that would look like and what it would cost. I'll remind everybody that the transfer tax applies to all real estate transfers. So commercial as well as residential contribute to that revenue source. And then looking at other new taxes. Anne Arundel County, for instance, enacted a telecommunications tax to generate some additional money to apply. And then there were some pieces looking at a moratorium on expenditures that are not directly related to systemic renovation, which addresses some of the deferred maintenance in order to make sure that I think Mark was talking about as life cycle things, making sure that we can continue to keep the existing buildings that we have operating and productive and safe for everybody. Then one is to hold projects at a certain level and not embark upon those until you've addressed more of the deferred maintenance piece. And then finally one to expand the budget authority of the county council, which currently has limited authority over the county executive's budget, except to reduce or to fund something that came directly from the school board. Next, we went on to additional options. And some of these, as I spoke before, where we're pulling together people from different levels. Some of these are on the county level, and some of these are on the state level, and some are things for HCPSS. So we're going to look at some of the state options, which is to expand. One is to expand the CIP funding from the state to all. Right now, there's not only, but there's roughly between $250 and $320 million a year that's allocated to all 24 districts. And though we are one of the larger districts in Maryland, the difference between us and the top 4 is multiples. I mean, Montgomery County is 3 times our size. Anne Arundel is 2.5. PG is larger. So we're more like in the middle group with Carroll and Harford and that. So the amount that we're going to get is somewhat proportional and has been around $20 to $25 million a year. And is there a way for the state to look at expanding that? And I'm just going to throw in that Governor recently said we have a $3 billion deficit. So I'm not sure that's going to happen soon, but it's still something that needs to be explored. The one-time Build to Learn funding is being distributed between now and 2031. So most of that will have to be allocated ahead. So we are eligible for some of that. It doesn't have some of the same restrictions that the eligibility for the annual funding does. So there's some interest in looking, could the state rally to identify another round, especially in light of the environmental things we're going to have to meet, also the sustainability and the of structures and what we're actually building given increased weather events and concerns about that. We just talked about, Ellicott City. But is there a possibility of targeting monies to make sure that not just Howard County, but all school systems can go there? Because again, anything we look at the state level is going to have to be considered by the legislature as a whole and potentially applies to the state as a whole. So we need to be looking, not just within our individual needs, but how this fits into the state picture. And the next one was really to talk about, is there a way to stop the slide in our eligibility, establish a floor that state funding can't drop below 50% or, or something like that, and what that would look like. And then finally, again, look at ways in which the eligibility is determined and where the focus of the state is in funding, based on the fact that every industry in the wake of COVID has to readdress how they're going to meet the needs of their customers, constituents, members, whatever. Should we be reassessing what our needs are for the delivery of education, and where we put the priority funding at the state level, not just at the local level? And then finally, we looked at some of the options that are in front of the school system and the school board. And one is to reassess the allocation of local funding to more effectively leverage the state capital funding. And we spoke that there are conflicting needs to be met there. That isn't the only criteria, but would that make a difference? Would that allow us to address some of these things more quickly if we prioritize them over the next 5 years or the next 10 years? Then work with the state, as I said, to seek more incentives for the use of prefab and innovative construction techniques, which might allow us to put things in place faster, that might allow us to reduce the cost but still meet the needs, and look at ways in which we can more effectively meet what's out there. Re-examine the calculation of program space needs, building capacity, and capacity utilization. That's one of the things that Dr. Irani spoke of in his opening statement, is that what do we have, what do we need, and how long do we need it? And we haven't necessarily done a reassessment of how we calculate capacity, and especially in light of the blueprint, what do our future capacity needs look like? What do our enrollment projections tell us? How do we look at how we use our existing assets more efficiently and effectively, and how do we keep them around long enough without necessarily investing in more 60+ year brick and block structures? And then the last thing is, again, to explore innovative operational solutions to improve efficiency and results, as well as funding things. Mark DeLuca was talking about the fact that we're getting funding from grants and things, especially IT is a capital expenditure. And we know that our IT needs are going to, technology needs are going to increase. We know that our environmental requirements are going to continue to rise. The NPDES impact of not meeting with a stormwater, the reduction in what goes into the bay can result in penalties. In the same way, we're going to be asked to build things that are not impacting adversely on the environmental health of the county and the region. So are there going to be grants from manufacturers, from agencies, from think tanks, from people who are looking at ways in which to improve this stuff, that we can take advantage of in order to meet the needs? So as I said before, these are all options that are being explored. Nothing has been, has been determined to be a recommendation. except for, in my mind, what has happened through this is opening up the fact that there are lots more questions to be asked, and that our options are limited by the fact that we already have commitments that must continue to be met, and there isn't a magic bullet. So that's it, and I got through really fast.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. I think for very concise but also very comprehensive coverage for the task force there. I want to open up for questions, maybe only allow a few minutes to go over that. Any questions? Todd?
I just have a comment. I think we addressed this as a committee last year, but just as a refresher for committee members who were here and information for new committee members, HCPSS enrollment peaked in the school year 2018-2019, and it's declined from then. We're down about 400 students, maybe even somewhat more from that number 7-8 years ago now. And it's forecast even by HCPSS to at best remain flat over the next decade. So we have added a good bit of capacity to the system since that 18-19 year. I think about 2,800 seats we've added, but of course we haven't added any students. And we're forecast to add another 2,000 seats to our capacity through 2035. Again, while we're not forecasting any increase in students. So I think it's just it's a good reference point for us as a committee to start with, understanding that we are right now at every teaching level, elementary, middle, high, below 100% capacity system wide, and we still have individual schools that are over their target levels of 105, 110, 115 for elementary, middle, and high. But as a system, we're under, and we're projected to go even more under over the next 10 years, as would be expected when we're adding 2,000 seats, but we're not adding any students. So that's just some context for Ellen's presentation.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I mean, what we used to be the fastest growing school system in the state, and that was about 2.2% increase. That is not where we are now for all the reasons that we've discussed before. Neighborhoods are not turning over. Families with young children are not coming in. An increasing percentage of our population, instead of being families with young children, are people turning 65, where their income is capped or even dropped, and so their contribution is different, but the needs are different. And so looking at what that actually means and how we deal with that, but also the need, you talked about the population dropping. Much of that is, again, in the lower levels. We're not seeing the replacement of, as seniors graduate, we're not seeing at the lower level students come in. And so that K-5 number is now being increased mainly by projections of what we're going to see through Blueprint for pre-K, but those aren't included in the design capacity for the schools. So that's one of the reasons to make sure that we're looking accurately at what we have and how it can be applied, and how long we're going to need it. And so I think this is a valuable exercise in order to pull people together and talk about the fact that, again, the state sets the requirements for curriculum delivery and program, for the payment for teachers, for the requirements for planning time, all of these things that are coming through that are going to have operational and or capital implications. And yet we know that the money available at the state level is going to be increasingly constricted. We're not going to be able to distribute. So we really need to take a look at what we really need, not only what we want, and juggle that against all the competing demands and how we're going to do this. So I hope that what comes out of this will help us get a better sense of that and help people understand why we're where we are. And I'll do my last frame of reference thing, as we have 2 minutes to go, but somebody can still ask a question. In the 1960s, Howard County had 23,000 residents, essentially farmers. By 2000, we had 250,000. So we built like crazy, and we built schools, and we did all that. And now in the last 20 years, we're seeing that change as the county's built out and things are not turning over, but we're needing, infrastructure adjustments. So we're just not where we were. And I think we talked about this last year as a committee, but we need to look at where we are, what the future really looks like, and what we can make use of that we already have, and restrict our commitment of additional funds that we don't. So any other questions? Sorry.
Thank you both
This is
very much. Go
This
ahead.
is Brian Hall,
Hey, Brian,
Chief
go ahead.
Financial Officer for the school system. Good morning, everybody. Really appreciate this conversation and the expertise that's been brought to the table today around all of these issues. I just wanted to point out quickly, as far as the capacity discussion with the schools, well, we are, projecting basically flat enrollment going forward. We're also in the midst of adding a 14th grade to the school system in pre-K. And the way that the state calculates the capacity of our buildings is very basic and antiquated, and it does not account for the changes in instructional delivery and wraparound services that the state at the same time is demanding school systems across the state implement. And so things like health rooms, pull-out classes for English language learners, a whole plethora of needs are just not captured in those capacity calculations. So I think that just underscores the need for this comprehensive look at what we have and what we really need. And that is something that the school system is currently undertaking.
And I appreciate that, Brian. I mean, that's exactly what is, to me, crystal clear, because we haven't really reassessed how we determine design capacity in like 30 years. So, and then what utilization is, because those pre-K kids aren't included in utilization now. And the capacity that we added for the schools that have specific pre-K capacity is not included. And until recently, the state didn't even fund them in the same way. So all of these things, the blueprint, the just changes in general, we need to commit to this. And I think it would inform everybody and help us get on where we need to go, and really look at where the need is and what we can do. We're at a different place than we were.
Thank you, Brian and Todd, for the question, and Alan for addressing and making some of the important points on that. So I'm wrapping up the meeting now, and the next meeting is on the 16th, so also Thursday at the same time, and we'll invite planning zoning to talk some of demographic and development changes there, Hoco by design, and also Todd, I think you chair the AFFO committee, also will share a little bit about that committee's findings or discussions there. Then after that, on the 23rd, their superintendent and his team actually is going to provide a briefing about the superintendent proposed budget on operating and CIP, so we have the chance to continue the dialogue on some of the issues here. And also that's the same day that there will be a business panel organized by EDA and also Chamber of Commerce. And on the 30th, there, Dr. Clinch and Jimmy is going to talk about the economy, personal income, and some of the immigration in and out of the county, typically including his presentation. And also Jimmy from the Realtors Association is going to talk about the housing market. So we have a lot more to digest, and thanks everybody for joining it today, especially for our speakers. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
All right, have a good one. Yeah.